And I start there at the kind of macro picture. So this is looking at gross operating profit per available room on a 12-month rolling basis. The reason we look at it this way, which is maybe not so apt for an individual hotel looking at the current month in time, but if you really want to understand what's going to happen in the future and which direction the markets are heading in, I think it's quite interesting to take the macro view and understand the fundamentals behind some of the market performance. So you see from the graphic on screen, I've just taken the four huge market regions in the globe, around the globe, because there are some kind of nuances in these numbers. But as a general theme, the revenues have been slowing for certainly for the last 12 months. I think when I presented at HotSpace was probably the first time we really started looking at this in a bit more detail and saying, okay, we are definitely seeing a point in time where the revenues are growing slower than the costs. And therefore, on an ongoing basis, this is a challenge facing hoteliers. And you can really see that from these numbers. The Americas generally had seen pretty much a flat line. Believe it or not, most of the numbers in the positive part of the numbers in Americas is propped up by South America. The US performance has been really flatlining for some time now from a profitability perspective. Middle East continues to grow and outpace Europe, albeit Europe is still in a positive trajectory, so still heading upwards, but very much slower than where we were those kind of 18 months ago when we were ramping back up on the back end of the crisis. And as you can see, Asia Pacific seeing the tail off, so a few different stories in the macro numbers. Now, if I take that to the kind of vertical view and just look at the year in its totality, I'd like to get some credit for my title of the slide, by the way, the terrific start, is I think that was being very much the theme. We've, of course, been front and center trying to monitor not just the impact on hotel top-line performance and demand, but also the impact on the cost lines for hotels in and around the region. Now, you can see for the full year of 2024, you shouldn't be that surprised. I'm sure you would have seen hopefully seen us present some of these numbers already last year. But the US performance there, 3% growth or just under, turned into almost zero profit. It's a good reason why we focused both on the total revenue picture and then also the impact to the bottom line, because they often do not correlate directly. Europe, totally the opposite, coming off the back of a really difficult 2023. So pretty substantial profit growth in comparison to pretty strong revenue growth. Asia Pacific pretty flat overall, but again, most of that dragged down by the Chinese performance, and then Middle East going from strength to strength. Now, if you look at the year-to-date picture in 2025, the story really is that flow-through, both in Americas and Europe, has been fairly strong overall. And you can see across there on the Middle East performance, very similar. So it certainly seems to be a year for flow-through. If we see the revenues, if we see top-line growth, that in general has converted into bottom-line performance. However, if you look across the European markets, it really does show quite a different picture depending on which market you're in. Certain nuances with regards to cost challenges, certainly in the areas of energy and labor, have impacted the likes of Portugal, Belgium, Austria. We'll see that on the left-hand side, with little to zero revenue growth, converting into negative profit territory. Those that have seen substantial revenue growth there further on the right-hand side, or the middle to the right, you can see have mostly converted to decent levels of profit. So it's really been a revenue story, because we are living with quite substantial cost increases right across the continent. The UK there, the kind of fourth from bottom, I guess, if we were to look at it this way, with pretty flat revenue positioning. So it's around it's actually just under 1% year to date there, 6.6% down from a profitability perspective. And you can see how that compares to the other markets. From the year to date performance, you can see overall, this is how it broke down. So that TrevPAR drop of just under 1% on the left-hand side, mixed with labor increases around 4.3%, drove a 6.6% drop in profit per available room overall. And now, of course, that was the year-to-date picture. It's propped up by a few months. We're all aware of April, where we saw the increase of national living wage, the impact of the national insurance changes as well, and a very small credit from the employer's allowance point of view. But generally, overall, you see the picture there. If we just compare the year-to-date pictures, around 4.3%. The impact of April there at 5.3%. So you would assume, you could quite easily assume that the impact on the bottom line from those changes so far has been around 1 percentage point of payroll margin, um, and therefore 1 percentage point of profit at the bottom line. So from that point of view, the impact overall around 1 percentage point is no small number, right? But just of context, as I'll show you in a moment, and the UK saw around 3 percentage points drop off of profit margin impacted by the energy costs and the food and beverage cost challenges over the last few years. The 1 percentage point is a real hit in the side for UK hoteliers. Now, as I mentioned, I managed to get some May performance numbers just literally a moment ago. That's why, sorry, I haven't had a chance to make it look pretty. I just wanted to throw this in last minute. So these are provisional numbers. We'll launch the data by the end of today. But you can see there, the numbers are really not that different from May. So we've seen actually a larger increase from a larger impact of the labor cost increases, around 6% for the month of May. Around 6.4% down from a GOPPAR point of view. And then from a TrevPAR point of view, just slightly smaller than the impact of April, but still, in fairly negative territory. So I'm sorry not to be able to give much good news from that point of view. Certainly you can see the year-to-date picture, the April numbers and the May numbers really stack up against each other in pretty consistent bleak picture. And what I've done here quickly to also just try to, display this a bit better, during that kind of ramp up period and post the crises, you can see, in fact, during the crisis, you can see revenues dropped more than the labor costs. So we still had to retain some labor, but we lost most of our revenues. If you look at the impact on, and sorry, what this graphic is doing, it's not that straightforward to kind of just see that. It's every month compared to the previous month. So it's literally looking at a percentage change month on month on a 12-month rolling basis. So it's literally to try and understand how much this is moving on an ongoing basis by looking at it on a month-by-month index. So on the left-hand side there of the COVID, you could see that we had this issue of revenue dropping more than labor. We came out of COVID and we had the luxury of revenues growing much faster than the labor costs. And I think that has been, as our benefit as we saw this ramp up coming out of the pandemic. And I've just zoomed in on the kind of last couple of years here. You can see it really bounced around. But if you look here on the left-hand side, if you look at on the right-hand side, the 12-month rolling average picture as of basically November, December time has been that labor costs have continued to grow and completely outpace the revenue direction, which again has been pretty unprecedented on an ongoing basis, as you could see from the graphic. So, we are going into a much more difficult time where labor costs are definitely growing more than revenues in the UK. If you look at the impact that's had year to date on the various markets around the UK, so again, if you haven't seen this slide before, on the right-hand side, we're looking at revenue growth. The top half of the slide, we're looking at GOP margin growth. So overall, there's only a handful of markets that have actually seen margin growth year to date versus last year. Most are in the red, as you can see on the left-hand side there. So revenue declines and margin declines at the same time. And then the blues on the right have basically seen revenue growth, but nothing in the way of margin increases. So yeah, real, challenge, I think, for UK hoteliers to look at. I think the only pattern we could really see from the regression analysis was that, if your market is growing more than 3 to 3.5%, that's the point where you basically start seeing margin growth to offset these cost increases. And then if you look at the UK, just split it between provincial and London, you can see there that the real difference is that London has very much surpassed the 2019 levels from a profit perspective. And then if you look at the provincial UK, which is on the bottom there in orange, even if you don't adjust for inflation, you can already see that not quite back at those 2019 levels. So the ongoing challenge has been that, we really haven't managed to fully recover from a UK hotel perspective. And that is even, I think, again, I'll use our friends at STR stat, which is, the UK runs at the highest occupancy of the G20 countries. So it's not like a market that's really struggling overall, but it's certainly in context of, the revenue potential, the rate growth, and then the ancillary spends mixed with the challenges we've had with energy and labor costs on an ongoing basis. And if you look at the UK here, at the macro picture, what this is doing there is on the left-hand side, we're looking at the year to date. So we've got the GOP margin versus the prior year. So you can see the change there, the drop off year on year. I would also point out that at this time of year, if we look at the year to date picture, it's quite normal that we see lower profit margins than we see for the full year picture. And also, if you look at the food and beverage there, the average UK hotel now is running at less than 20% profit margin in food and beverage. Again, another key challenge, and lots of creativity out there in the hotel space at dealing with that challenge and hopefully convert into an opportunity. On the right-hand side, what we're looking at there is versus 2019. So that's that 3 percentage points drop you can see between 19 and 23 from a margin perspective. You see the growth there in 24. So we saw pretty, I think overall hoteliers would have been fairly happy with 2024. But you can see on the 12-month rolling basis, it's already heading south as we go into 2025. So we're looking more towards the 2023 number from a margin perspective for this year. For provincial UK, the story's not that much different, other than the fact that really we didn't see that huge uplift in 24 versus 23 in the same way that you saw on the macro picture. And overall, the profit margin has dropped around 4 percentage points since 2019 for provincial UK. So certainly been hit harder than London, where you can see here, for instance, London performance dropped by around 3.5 percentage points over that period, but we've already managed to get to 42% there, so just under 3% down on the 2019 numbers overall. And in fact, I'll also highlight food and beverage there. So if you look now, not just under 20%, but London hotels now hovering around the 15% mark from a profit margin point of view. Now, I'm going to try and throw in a few positives because, of course, we will look through the numbers and you can always find them, which is the great thing about looking at data like this is that, it's not, there's always going to be the areas that you need to focus on, the areas that may be areas of opportunity or challenge throughout your strategy. But what this is really showing is that those top segments there, you see the Smurf conventions, some of the contractor business, etc., have seen pretty substantial ADR growth by segment there over the last 12 months. The challenge for us is, of course, that the retail, wholesale, negotiated, and corporate segments make up such a large part of the pie for UK hotels. And of course, when you've seen such little growth in those segments, overall, that does, of course, cause the challenge from a overall ADR point of view. But there are definitely opportunities within the segmentation. And of course, the challenge for hoteliers is to make sure we maximize the most profitable segments and take advantage of the demand patterns that we can see here. And if you look at the other revenues, well, overall, we look at the 12-month period now, we've certainly seen that slow down. So I was reporting pretty positive growth in C&B revenues coming up to Hotspace last year. But we've really seen the slowdown over the last 6 months. Now, again, our friends at Venue Performance who co-presented with us there are talking about pretty positive forward-looking business on the books for C&B for the rest of the year. So there is maybe some positivity in the numbers. We of course only have access to the historical numbers here. The food and beverage performance, you can see there that 1.8% growth is really minimal considering the size of the cost increases. But those ancillary revenues of golf, wellness park, those hotels that are lucky enough to have other levers, other services to drive, are taking advantage of those. And I think this has been the consistent message across all the conferences I've been to this year, is that we know food and beverage is a challenge. We know that, demand overall is slowing and we have this challenge from a top line perspective. It's not just those three levers of if you're lucky enough to have golf, wellness, or large car parks that you're going to be able to drive ancillary revenues. There are lots of other options and creativity that hoteliers can get back to the table and really look at, what we do, what we sell from a hotel perspective above and beyond just selling bedrooms. And this has really been the key picture. So from a conferencing point of view, it is a bit of a mixed bag. So you can see here on the kind of left-hand side, the markets in order of kind of drop off year on year. So it was actually interesting, as I presented with Venue Directory a few weeks ago, that our numbers looked really similar, which is quite refreshing. You could see here, this is on a per square meter basis. So Swindon, Sheffield, Brighton seem, the largest tail off year on year, and the biggest opportunity seemed to be in Leicester, Bournemouth, Birmingham, which you can see there on the bottom. Now, from a labour point of view, well, overall, as you would have seen from my previous graphic, we are looking at pretty substantial labour increases year to date. Across the board, you can see that it does impact most of the departments at just that kind of 6 to 8% mark. Food and beverage much lighter than the other areas, which I thought was quite surprising. But I think that's probably the area the hoteliers have hit the hardest, knowing that revenue performance has been slow. And of course, at a time where we're seeing revenue slowing, demand challenges, I would also question the wisdom of the lower A&S costs year on year. This is looking at April versus April. So you can see there the kind of lowest increase we've seen year on year from a departmental point of view has been actually in the area that probably drives a big chunk of the revenue. So I think it's, again, another interesting piece to look at from a hotelier perspective. If you look at the actual expenses, well, this has probably been our tailwind for a little while, as we've seen costs starting to, come down. Labor has definitely been the real challenge, and energy costs for some time. Energy costs continue to head south. We are entering the period of the year with the lowest levels of consumption, albeit you don't know what of course, the obvious conflicts in the world are going to cause from a cost perspective there. Supply costs have continued to fall, and again, coming from a pretty high base, of course, as inflation has slowed, we have seen the impact of that on the cost lines. And maybe due to the segmentation, so much higher kind of group and Smurf business on the top has driven less in the way of booking costs. But overall, we are still dealing with, pretty high levels of labor cost growth, and we're not really able to offset that just by a drop in prices from a supplies point of view. And for that reason, my message has been really around driving revenues and getting back to the table and looking at the best ways that hotels can really look at opportunities to pull new levers and drive new revenue streams. Labor will continue to be our challenge, and the overall impact on labor costs for certainly in the lower ended wage levels of the hotels, we're expecting to see that 7 to 10% increase overall. And then as you look at, that's going to be on wages, not just on the total labor costs, because hotels will have to find a creative way to offset some of that. Slow in C&B growth, as I said, it's not consistent across the board, but generally we are starting to see, or we have seen that in the year-to-date numbers. The costs are showing in general, or slowing in general, sorry, but margins are under pressure, and overall, energy costs have been the real prop-up for us as they continue to fall, and of course have a positive impact on the margin overall.